I now recognize Ranking Member Cruz for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said in my opening statement, I have serious concerns that U.S. leadership is falling behind in aviation. As we continue to move forward with emerging technologies like unmanned aircraft systems and other advanced air mobility systems, I have serious doubts about how long it will take the FAA to provide the regulatory certainty that these companies need. You all represent the regulated industry, and you all have to deal with the FAA in some way, shape, or form. So I want to get a better understanding as a practical matter from each of you. From each of your perspectives, what seems to be the problems, and why aren't we moving faster on fostering the growth of these new entrants, on integrating them into the national airspace? And is it a lack of resources or funds at the FAA? Is it a leadership problem? Is it what's causing the uncertainty? And I'd like each of you to address this. Ms. Ellman?
Sure. Thank you for that very important question, Senator Cruz. In our experience, first, let me start, so the technology has moved much more quickly than the policy. The challenges that the FAA is facing are systemic. I will say the individuals that I've worked with at the FAA are hardworking, well-intentioned individual staffers that are trying to do what they can to integrate UAS into the national airspace. The reality is it's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't fit. They're using, incongruous regulations designed for crewed aircraft and trying to fit UAS commercial drones into this regulatory framework that simply doesn't fit. From our perspective, there's been some proposals out there about, even the FAA has recognized that there's a lack of organization or a lack of leadership on this topic, and we've seen some proposals coming from the administration. We appreciate that we agree that the status quo is broken. From our perspective, we need to see responsibility and authority aligned. We need to have a leadership office. We've been talking, several of our witnesses have talked about the need for a national vision and a national strategy. Certainly, China and other countries are developing their own national strategies and moving ahead with this in this technology. We need to do the same here at home. It's critical for our global competitiveness, and the way to do that is by actually aligning responsibility with authority within the agency so that one office has the authority to actually sign off on waivers, exemptions, approvals. Right now, if you want to do research and development, it can take 2 years to get a one site-specific approval to do R&D here in the U.S. It's simply not sustainable. So we need the certainty, we need the transparency, but above all, we really need the leadership. And we have our own proposal on this that I'm happy to follow up with you and your staff about as well.
Yeah, I would welcome it, and that's helpful. I've heard similar concerns from other stakeholders that it's hard to know to whom you go to even get an answer.
Exactly.
Colonel Luxian.
Yes, sir. I'm going to almost restate some of what was just said. You're right on the, when we work with industry to try to identify what requirements and what needs to be done within FAA, many times they do not know who has the responsibility and the authority across the whole gamut of what that industry is trying to do to get it accomplished. So there is a structural issue that needs to be addressed, and it can't be put in very low levels of the FAA. It has to be raised to a priority level that can drive across the FAA some level of hey, let's get on board and move this thing forward. The other thing I brought up in my opening statement is, okay, once we get the structural place in some place with responsibility, what is the path forward? What is the regulatory gaps? What is missing in regulation? And lay it out from all aspects of what industry and first responders, public safety is trying to accomplish. Without that, we're just going to continue to, everything is going to be a one-off. And as my colleague Lisa and good friend said, the folks inside the FAA that we work with day in and day out are trying, and they're working very, very hard, but they run into these barriers throughout the whole process.
Mr. Feynman.
So I'll add 2 points to your question here. Number one is deadlines. Nothing gets done without a schedule, goals, and deadlines, and some of what happens here happens without deadlines, and so Will we have an AAM Certification Act in 2024, or Regulation 2024? Will we have it later? If we put in deadlines and hold an organization accountable to those deadlines, things tend to get done. So that is the first thing I would say. The second thing that I would say is mindset. Mindset of safety mandate versus innovation. There seems to be sometimes in order to fulfill our safety mandate, we have to take our time to make sure we get this right, as if somehow innovation is a threat to safety. But in fact, what we have seen time and again is that innovation leads to safety. Historically, we have seen this with synthetic vision systems, terrain warning systems, weather radar, all of which were innovations that led to increased safety. And in fact, we don't have to do safety or innovation. It can be safety and innovation that drives safety. So for example, as we are sitting here today, there's a hurricane going on in Florida, and drones could have a lot to do with improving the safety and the recovery from that hurricane. So those are the two things, deadlines and accountability to deadlines, and number two is safety mindset, and innovation can lead to safety. It is not a threat to safety. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bowen?
Yeah, coordination and communication is key. As you know, the FAA has different lines of business, air traffic organization, airports, certification, safety. All of these need to be coordinated and communicating with each other. That doesn't happen without direction and purpose. They need to be very intentional. I also want to underscore what has just been said about deadlines. It was brought up earlier that the FAA will now use an approach that requires a special federal aviation rule regulation in order to move forward. The expectation is that that will be done in 2 years. It is important that we stick to that time frame and that we work backward trying to determine what needs to be done. We also need to recognize that the FAA's approach, and one that the industry largely supports, is a crawl, walk, run approach. We're going to start with what we know, and we're going to iterate. We're going to evolve. We're going to adapt as new technologies and new operations come forward. We've got to make sure that it is, in fact, an iterative process. Just this week, we had a new design engineering brief for vertiports. Really critical as we're moving forward to a new vertiports AC, hopefully within 2 years. But we've got to start conservative, but build out, iterate, and get to the promise of advanced air mobility.
Okay. And Mr. Davis?
The advanced air mobility market, for our subset of the advanced air mobility market, common certification standards for aircraft battery technology that allows us to commercialize our product and bring it to market around the world is a key thing that we would need from the FAA.
Okay, thank you.